earlier this year, when we were thinking about a topic to speak at Tableau conference, we wanted to make sure that it was a topic that would address a real problem. But we also wanted to make sure that it was a topic that was fun. It was a topic that was sexy. And it was then when we ran into this.
Sure is.
So, how many of you are data scientists? Right? Several hands. How many of you work with data scientists? Perfect. Well, you're all sexy by association. And whether you are in those last two groups, or you're here today just because you want to learn more about how Tableau can help with data science, you're in the right place. See, jokes aside, earlier this year, I was working with a data scientist in one of my customers, and she had built a couple of very telling forecasting models. So she wanted to share not just with her data science group, but with the broader community, with the business and even executives. But she knew that it was going to be almost impossible to teach everyone how to use Python and how to run those models in Python. She wanted to make it easy. So she knew also that most people were already using Tableau. Most of the company were already using dashboards, and they liked them. She was herself a Tableau user, and she knew how to build dashboards from scratch. She's been doing it for a while. But regardless of how much she knew about Tableau, and regardless that she had built the models herself, so she knew the code inside and out, she was having trouble making that code work with Tableau. She was having trouble modifying the code so it can work with Tableau table calculations. And so she was afraid that all the work that she had done already would be just thrown away, that the models wouldn't have the impact that they could and that they should have. So with the method we'll show you today, with the framework, she was able to allow everyone to use those models without having to teach anyone how to use Python. Moreover, she was able to allow everybody to explore the results of those models in the dashboards that people already liked and use in Tableau. So that's what we want to share with you today. But before we do that, who are we? My name is Santiago Sanchez. I'm a solutions consultant at Tableau. I've been with Tableau for about 4 years now, and I work with Tableau's strategic customers in the Bay Area. Before I was in this team, though, I was part of the embedded analytics team at Tableau. That team is in charge of helping any customer who's embedding Tableau into their web portals, their web applications, their products. And the reason why I joined that team is because during college, I studied computer science, and my first job out of college was as a web developer. I studied there. That's Monterrey, at the northern part of Mexico. And I'm sharing all of this web development story, and just because one of the goals for me today is to share with you how some concepts that you would typically align with web applications apply to Tableau, and how you can apply those concepts and make Tableau do really cool stuff that's out of the box, that's not out of the box, that's not native into Tableau. Of course, everything in the context of data science. And speaking of data science, today with me we have Blair Hutchinson. Blair is a senior product consultant at Tableau. He's been with Tableau for about 3 years, and when he's not practicing Kung Fu in the mountains, like he's over there, he's thinking about advanced analytics. But he can tell you a little bit more about that.
Great. Thanks, Santiago. You guys can see the resemblance. This picture is actually of me standing on top of the Grand Teton in Grand Teton National Park. So for any national park enthusiasts or rock climbers, this is a pretty fun picture of me. The most impressive part of this is not that I'm standing on the top. It's actually my 55-year-old mom is actually taking the picture behind the screen. So aside from climbing and things like that, as Santiago mentioned, I spend a lot of time working with our customers around advanced analytics. And I work in our customer consulting department and lead a team to help solve those issues in Tableau and work with our product management team to relay those use cases so we can improve the product. So Santiago and I up here talking to you guys about how you can embed Tableau for self-service data science. And you guys are all in the room because you see the opportunity to scale out your data science team, or you want to learn a little bit more about how you can actually embed Tableau into your portals. So what we're going to talk about is first the current paradigm and the problem that Santiago and I are seeing with our customers. And then we're going to talk through our solution, which, as the method of doing so, is through embedding. The meat of the talk today is going to really be about the implementation, the steps that we took to actually get to an end result that we could ship to our customers. So a little housekeeping too, we're going to hold questions till the end. We'll have plenty of time for questions. And all of this is actually being recorded, and all the material will be sent out to you guys at the end. A gentleman also mentioned that you guys might have flight times around 5 o'clock, so if you do have to go, feel free to stand up. Just try and be quiet as you're kind of exiting. That's totally fine, though. OK, so let's jump into it. So let's start out with the problem. Let's kind of survey what we've been seeing with customers. It starts out with a data scientist. And this is the sexiest picture that I could find of a data scientist. And our data scientists work with a variety of tools that put them in a position where they're in high demand within the company. And that kind of introduces the people that are demanding the resources of the data scientist team, the users. And these users could be external, they could be internal. For the purposes of today, it really doesn't matter. But they approach the data scientists with a question. And the data scientists are going to put together a data source or a model to help answer that question for the users. The problem that we've seen is that our data scientists are getting inundated with these questions. And the bandwidth that they have to actually answer those questions is limited. So we saw this as an opportunity to figure out how we can actually scale the work that they're doing, because a lot of the questions that the users are asking are all very similar. So at this point, you might be thinking, well, R and Python, well, doesn't that already exist with Tableau's native integrations? So who's here has heard of external services? Keep your hands up if you've actually worked with external services. OK, nice. So actually, a lot of people have, or a few people have. And this is a scalable, proven method to use R and Python and data science within Tableau. There's also a really good session. Unfortunately, it's already run, but that session will be available to you guys kind of as a recording that walks through how you can leverage this method to scale out your data science team as well. But what we've heard is that there are some caveats to this. So I want to run through a few scenarios of why external services might not be the right approach for your system. The first is what Santiago mentioned in our customer story, is that adapting the code could prove to be impossible or really difficult with the external services connection. The other piece is that you actually might want to persist that data into a database so you could actually use it then in Tableau. The way external services work is it's a live connection between R and Python. The third reason is that the time to execute that model might be above a certain threshold. So it might be so long that it's a really bad user experience and you don't want to tell people to go get a cup of coffee. Maybe you just want to send them an email or something like that when it's executed. And the fourth reason is that the model requires different inputs and outputs than the Tableau visualization can actually send to the service. So that's now actually core to how external services work. And if you dig into that a little bit more, that becomes quite a big limitation. So if you fall into any of those categories, then this solution is going to be one that you guys can use. So now we've got our two main players. We've got our data scientists and our users. But now we've just put a web portal in between them. And the web portal serves up visualizations from Tableau Server. And we'll show you guys how to do that. What the data scientist is going to do is instead of going directly to the user, he or she is going to publish up an endpoint to the model that they've created, a script that can be executed from the portal. What that then allows is for users to go in and ask and answer their own questions via that portal. So that all sounds great, but how about we actually look at this in real time in a demo? Okay, so this is our landing page for our demo. And I'm going to sign in as Jamie. And you can think of Jamie as a real estate developer, not a real estate developer, a real estate broker. And she works with customers all day, and she tries to figure out what homes they might be interested in. So she's given a variety of requirements from that user, and she wants to figure out what homes they might be interested in. So in this portal, we've got a tab here called our Data Science Desk. And we have two different models that our data science team has published up. One's the buyer sentiment analysis, which looks at and analyzes the sentiment of different buyers for different cities. And we also have our price predictor. So Jamie is going to use our price predictor. And she's got a customer that wants a big house for a big family. And let's see the lot. We'll say she wants a big lot with a yard for the dog. And she wants to really be located around Green Lake in Seattle. So when we run the model, now this is that user experience that you can add on. So if this model takes a really long time, you can think of this being like an email that gets sent out to you at the end when it executes. In this case, we'll just open up the workbook. And now we've got all the information that model has actually passed back to this data source. So the experience that Jamie's going to be able to see is she can see her name, making sure that this is, in fact, her most recent run. This ran just a few seconds ago. And we've got information about the model itself. So for the data science in the crowd, we can see that we're going to take this result with a grain of salt because it's a mean average error of $51,000. So the predicted price, though, is about $574,000. And we can use now this Tableau dashboard to explore different houses that might be bigger than what Jamie's original customer might have thought. So let's highlight a few of those examples that might be bigger lots and bigger square foot living. Now we can see where some of these different houses are around the Seattle area. Okay, so that might be Jamie's experience. Now let's go through and kind of act as a different user and go through a similar scenario. So I'm going to sign in now as Cameron. Cameron signs in and he sees the exact same thing. But instead of going through and using the price predictor, he's actually already made a run for a customer that he continues to work with. So instead of inputting these variables again, he can just open up the workbook that he ran. This looks like this executed a few weeks ago now. We've got our predicted price, and now we've got all the outputs of that previous run that we already had. Right? Okay, so let's break down a little bit what we saw. So first of all, how can we get there? Well, the first way that we can get there is there are plenty of Tableau partners out there. A lot of them are actually at this conference. They would be happy to take your money and build this whole thing for you. But this is a Jedi class, and I know that you guys don't want to go out and just buy it. You also want to know how to build it. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. And at this point, I want to introduce to you 3 different personas that can help us get there. The first is going to be the data scientist. Then we have our Tableau Server admin and our web developer. And for purposes of today, I'm going to represent the data scientists and the Tableau Server admin, and Santiago is going to be our web developer. So how do those players play into the framework of what we just saw? So we're going to go through this in terms of how to actually build it. So the first thing that we need is our data scientists to create a model. This model needs to be executed somehow, right? Once it's executed, then it needs to push that information out to a database. And that database then serves up is a live connection to a data source, or excuse me, a workbook that lives in Tableau Server. That workbook and that model then get pulled in together via the web server. So the web server is now able to execute the Python code and then also serve up the visualization in the same place. So let's talk about the implementation. First, we're going to start with the data scientists. And we're going to talk about how we actually created the models that we're then being able to execute and push that information out to a data source. So here are the first steps. First thing is that you need to actually create and train a predictive model. So in my case, that was that price predictor model that came up with a number for Cameron's customer for the house that she was looking to buy. The next thing is we need to write a script that's going to expose relevant variables that are important to pass through to that model. And then the last piece there is creating and saving the script so that it can be executed on a server. So now this is a code snippet of the script that I wrote to actually pass the information, to take the information in and pass it out to the data source. Let's break this down. The first thing is that we need to identify those input variables. So in the demo, that was the bedrooms, the bathrooms, square foot living. And it's also taking in information like the username and the timestamp of when this was executed from the web application. The next piece is we need to load that data in, and we need to do some sort of ETL. In my case, I was actually filtering the data based on relevant homes. So I'm just doing a little bit of filtering here. The next thing is we need to call the model that we've created, that price predicting model, that's going to score all of those houses and assign them a price. So the three things that we've just run through, this is totally up to you to define. You guys can, I'm just walking you guys through one methodology of doing this. This is where you get to be creative and figure out what's important to the customer and what you want to actually serve up for them. These next two pieces are going to be specific to things that we'll talk about a little bit later. First is adding columns for the timestamp and the username. So we got that information from the web portal, and now we just need to append that information to the data set, the data frame that we've created. The next piece is then exporting this information to a database. So in our case, we're just calling a SQL server and pushing that data frame out. So at this point, the data lives in a database. Now we just need to use Tableau Desktop to connect to that and then push it up to server. So what do we need to do in Tableau Desktop? Well, I'm not going to cover how we went through and built the visualization. What I really want to just call out is a couple things that you need to do to filter the data so Jamie's seeing her information and Cameron's seeing his. Also, we want to make sure that you're only seeing the most recent run that either Cameron or Jamie has executed. So what that looks like in Tableau Desktop is we need to go to the data source pane, and we need to add those filters to the data source itself. So those two filters are going to look like this. We've got one called the last run filter, and we have a second one called the user filter. The last run filter is just a level of detail expression that calls out the most recent run that either user has performed. The user filter is using the user function, the username function in Tableau, and just calling out the variable in the data set that we actually push to the data source. So that's that row-level security that we're implementing. Once we have the information in Tableau Desktop, now we just need to publish it up to Tableau Server. And again, you guys are all Jedis, so I really just wanted to call out some of the important things and best practices once you get to Tableau Server. The first is always create groups. We reiterate this all the time, and as a consultants, we're always making sure that customers are doing this. Create a group first. That'll make it really scalable to actually implement the permissions that need to go to the users of those individual groups. And the last thing, and this is something that's mostly overlooked, is locking down the permissions of that project. What that means is that any workbook that gets pushed into that project that now lives in that web portal, they inherit all of those permissions that are set to that group. So at this point, we have our Python code that's being executed, sent to a database, and now it lives in a workbook in Tableau Server. Now we need to use our web server to expose the endpoint of our models and also bring back the workbook from Tableau Server. And to do that, I'm going to pass it over to Santiago, our web developer.
Thank you, Blair. So just quick show of hands. How many of you have done some kind of web development? A lot of web development. OK, perfect. Well, look around. Those are your experts. Make sure to reach out to them. But we'll cover all the bases, though. This web application, if you remember, needs to do two main things. It's a bridge between the Tableau server and our model. So to do that, it should at the very least do these three particular things. Number one, it needs to be able to receive the variables from the end user. Remember the number of bedrooms, the number of bathrooms that we're interested on. And then it needs to be able to pass those variables to the model itself. Second, we need to be able to configure single sign-on to Tableau Server. We've already typed in our username and password when we went into the web application. We don't want to type it again and again and again every time. So we just want to give a good user experience for everyone. So that's single sign-on. And number three, we need to actually embed the workbook. Once we run the model, we want to see the results in the same place. We don't want to jump from the web application to Tableau Server to see the results of my model. Everything can happen in the same place. So let's see how we do that. Let's start with the web application that receives the variables and then passes those to the model. So this has two pieces. One is a web page where we're able to type the variables that we are interested in getting from the end user, and then passing that to the model. So in our demo today, this is how that web page looks like. It's just a set of inputs where the user can type anything they're interested on. So this is just HTML and JavaScript. It can be very simple or very complicated, as much as you want to do it. So that's where your web developers can decide what's the best way to show this. But it's simply a web page. What's important is how to get those variables from there and then pass them into the model. Now, this looks more complicated than it is. Let's break it into pieces. There are many ways on how you can capture those variables from the web page. But what we're using today is using a JSON object. It's just a string. It's some text that has all the variables that we want to use. From that text, we can parse the individual pieces that we're getting from the end user. But remember, one important thing that Blair mentioned is we also need to add who's running the model. Is it Jamie? Is it Cameron? And when are they running the model? So we're going to make sure that besides the variables we capture, we also get the username and the time when that was run. And finally, we execute the model. But you may be thinking, hold on, that's just one line of code. How are you actually running that? And when we were preparing this content earlier this year, it was at this point when Blair and I were a little bit puzzled. We were not sure if this was actually going to work. We didn't know how a web application, it's in a web server, it is using C#, for example, can pass those variables and run something that's built in Python or in R, in a totally different language, totally different platform. So we were a little bit unsure, but it turns out to be easier than you may think. How would you run a Python model in general? Just couple of methods that come to mind. I heard a couple. Yeah, one of them is by using just a command line, a command prompt, right? It's probably the simplest. You first need to specify where Python lives, where your executable file lives. You then need to specify where your script lives. What's that script we want to run in Python? And lastly, you run. You pass the variables, so you can run it. But this is, of course, using a command line. We're not using a command line. We're using a web application. So how do we bridge the two? Again, this is easier than what it looks like. Let's break it into pieces. Remember, the first step is specify where that Python executable file lives. So we can do that with those 2 lines of code. We then can specify where the script lives, what's the location of that Py file that we want to run, and pass the variables that we got from the web page. Now, this piece is important. Because we're running this remotely, it's happening on the web server, we don't actually need to show a command line show up. That would not be possible. It's not running on the customer's, on the user's machine. It's running on a separate web server. So we want to specify that that command line gets open in the background. We can do that by setting up options like that. And after we've done all of that, we actually execute the model. So it's just like pressing enter in our command line. For our demo today, the model is saving the results back to a database. But if you want to, this could actually return something back to the web application. In our case today, it's just returning a success or a failure, depending on how things work. Ideally, every time it would be a success. But this would just return that to the web application, so the web application knows that the model was run successfully. Okay? So if we did that correctly, we have that little line down towards the bottom. We have bridged the web application with our Python model. And once the model is run, we actually want to explore the results of the model. So now we need to bridge the web server with Tableau Server. There were 2 pieces here, right? Perfect. One was single sign-on, right? We don't want to type username and password many times, so that's one thing. Let's start with that. In Tableau Server, there are many ways in how you can set up single sign-on. You can use what we call trusted authentication. You can use Windows authentication, especially if it's something in your intranet. You can use SAML, but there are other methods that can also be used. For our application, and what I see a lot of customers using is trusted authentication. It's because it's easy to implement and it's lightweight. So today, we'll show you how to do that with trusted authentication. So what is trusted authentication? I think of trusted authentication as going to amusement parks. I'm a big fan of going to amusement parks. So the first thing I do when I go to an amusement park is obviously get to the gate, park my car, get to the gate. And I think at that point, I need to get a ticket. So I go to the ticket booth. In the ticket booth, I request a ticket. I get handed a ticket. And then with that ticket, I can choose which ride I want to go on. And then I hand out the ticket, and then I get to have fun. I get into the ride, right? So trusted authentication is very similar, but we have a slightly different players. We use the browser to get into the amusement park. So this browser is actually about going to the gate of the amusement park. We then have the web server where our web application lives. That's the ticket booth. So we get into the amusement park, we get to the ticket booth. And once there, we request a ticket. We request a ticket to Tableau Server. Tableau Server actually has 2 functions in this trusted authentication diagram. It will give us tickets, but it also holds the rights. It also holds the visualizations that we can use. So first thing, we go and request the ticket to the ticket booth. The ticket booth, then there's a cashier there, so the cashier can hand us the ticket. That ticket gets sent back to the user, to me, and into the browser. And if I have a valid ticket, I can go into Tableau Server and request a visualization. It's a live visualization that we can use and to explore the results of the model. So this is how it works. But how do we actually write the code to make that work? Again, more complicated than it looks, than it is. First, we need to specify who we are and what site are we going into Tableau Server. So I need to specify, this is Jamie, and he or she are going to this specific site into Tableau Server. Then we need to form a web request. This is a post web request, and what it needs to include is it needs to include a URL. That's the URL of Tableau Server. It needs to include the username and the site that we're going into. With those three things, we can send a request to Tableau Server, and if we did this correctly, we are able to get a ticket from Tableau Server. Now, how does that ticket look like? It's pretty boring. It's just a very long set of characters. So I prefer to think of it more like this. And it's also because it helps me keep in mind a very important thing about trusted tickets. You can only use a trusted ticket once. Once you use a ticket and you use it to open a session in Tableau Server, you cannot use it anymore. It will be invalid after that first time that you use it. So you can open a session and you can use Tableau Server for the length of that session, but you cannot reuse the ticket more than one time. If you do it, you'll get a -1. So if you get a -1, just make sure that you're not reusing the tickets. So we have single sign-on, but we still haven't gotten the visualization. We need to now see the data, right? So for that, we'll explore two APIs. In Tableau, we have multiple APIs, but the ones we'll use today are two, the JavaScript API and the REST API. I see these two terms used interchangeably a lot. Sometimes we mix them up. So first, let's define a little bit of what they are and how we use them. The JavaScript API allows us to embed a visualization into a web application. It's a live visualization, one that we can interact with. So it helps us build dual communication between the web application and the live visualization of Tableau Server. The REST API, on the other hand, allows us to query metadata in Tableau Server. It allows us to query, for example, permissions. It allows us to query what workbooks I have access to. It even allows us to query small thumbnails of the visualization, but it's not the live visualization per se. It's just metadata around it, okay? So in today's demo, what we used the JavaScript API for was to embed the live vis into the application. So that helped us render that piece that Jamie was using to explore more houses. The REST API, on the other hand, allows us to help build the experience for Cameron. Cameron went in, and once he did that, he was able to see what workbooks he had access to and just see thumbnails of them. But it was not the live vis. It was just a pointer to the live visualization, okay? So let's talk about the JavaScript API. Again, this helps us with the live visualization, and how we use that JavaScript API in its simplest form is probably something like this. This is JavaScript, so let's break it into pieces. First, we need to specify the URL of the viz, what visualization we want to load, where does it live in Tableau Server. Second, because this visualization is going to be part of the web application, we want to tell where are we going to render that visualization, in which place of my web application we're going to render that. That's generally a div, just a placeholder div where we are going to have a live visualization. And lastly, we need to specify how are we going to render that visualization. How big should it be? Should we hide the toolbars? Should we show the toolbars? Do we want to do something after it loads? All of that we can specify here on the options section. And finally, we get to use all of that to render the visualization, okay? Now, if we did this correctly, we'll be good to go. But I oftentimes struggle in one particular piece, and I see a lot of customers tripping also in that same piece, which is creating the right viz URL. Okay, so let's try to do that. First, we need to know where Tableau Server lives, the URL of Tableau Server. This is an internal Tableau Server in this case, so it's just tab server. Now, what were we using for single sign-on? You guys remember? It was trusted authentication, right? So there's a keyword in Tableau Server to indicate that. You want to add a trusted keyword on your URL. And after you do that, you actually get to use the ticket that we got a moment ago for single sign-on. Okay? So you add a ticket there. If your server has multiple sites, there's also a keyword or a key letter that you want to add there is a T. And then you want to specify the site where your visualization lives. So now we should be in the right site, but we still need to get to the right workbook. So we want to add a name of the workbook and a name of the view where we want to go. This is the name of the dashboard that we want to render. Okay? So this is how it should look like. And if we did this correctly, this will render a live viz into our web application. Right? But we're forgetting about the other API. What was the other API? It was the REST API, right? Now, before we get there, we covered a lot for the JavaScript API, but don't worry if that was just a high-level overview. There's a lot of really good resources in the web. There's a short video, there's a full reference, but by far my favorite one is the JavaScript tutorial. It's really, really, really good. It has live code that you can see run and you can modify on the fly. It's really good, so highly suggest that. Now, the REST API. What it helped us do was to show these little two thumbnails down the bottom of the models. These were, basically we checked what Cameron had access to in Tableau Server, and then we render those workbooks, just the thumbnails of those workbooks, okay? So again, how does that look like? Now, who wants to see more code? Oh, those are more hands than I thought that I'd get. That's perfect. So, well, we have a little bit for everyone. So there is more code here. But if you're going to use the REST API, here's my suggestion. While you can build your request from scratch and build an HTTP request just like we did for trusted tickets from scratch, we have some libraries out there, some supported by Tableau, some created by the community, that are wrappers for the REST API. They are pre-built libraries for you. So instead of creating the request from scratch, you can log in with a single line of code. So if you're going to use the REST API, try to check out some of those libraries as opposed to creating it from scratch. You can always create it from scratch. We love more libraries if you want to put more libraries out there, but there are already some. So what are they? Again, full reference to the API if you want to play with it, but these three libraries down the bottom are the ones that I'd suggest. Two are built in Python, one is built for .NET Java, and the first one is supported by Tableau. The other two are community-based. But they're all really good. So if you want to start playing with the REST API, you may want to start there. It will make your lives a lot easier, right? So that's a lot of content. Those were a lot of links, a lot of code. I think we all need to just take a deep breath, you know. All right, and let's summarize this, okay? How does that framework look like? Let's go back to the demo that Blair did at the beginning. When Jamie went into the web application, the first thing he or she did was to type their username and password, right? Once they did that, they were able to see the different models that were available for them. And with those models received variables. So those variables were sent back to, in this case, Python, could be R, could be anything else, right? Now, those models ran and saved the results back to a database. So the results were persisted in this database. And after the run was successful, a node was sent back to the web application just saying, hey, I'm done. This worked, okay? So once that was done, we needed to now talk to Tableau Server. So we use these two APIs to talk to Tableau Server along trusted authentication, the trusted tickets. So with that, we can create a bridge into Tableau Server. This Tableau Server is actually using live visualizations that are reading from a database. So that database is serving up data to Tableau Server. And once those vizzes are ready, that is actually rendered in the web application. So then we have a full live visualization to interact with. In today's demo, we use a single server to host both the web server and Python. You could do that if you want to have more flexibility. This could be different machines. It's up to you. It just depends on how you want to scale that. Okay? This is how the whole framework looks like, right? Now, what next, Blair?
It's a good question, Santiago. So you guys are all sitting in this room because you see an opportunity, right? Or you're actually working with an existing problem. And there's a lot of noise right now in the marketplace around machine learning and AI and advanced analytics and data science. What we've heard from customers is that implementing any of those is really the crux. So what Santiago and I have done today is provided you guys a framework and gone through each of the different steps to get you started.
And we want to leave you with one challenge. After Tableau conference, when you get back home and things have settled down, it may take a couple of days, identify who these players are. Who can help you build this at your companies? So you can take the reach and the impact of data science, not just to a couple of teams, but to the whole company, to the whole organization. And with that, I just want to ask you a couple of things. Number one, do you think that this was helpful? Cool. When you go back home, is there at least one thing that you can apply back in your companies? Cool. And do you have questions? All right, well, first off, thank you all.
Yeah,
we really appreciate you for taking the time. We will go into questions, but before you'll have to go.
Yeah, you guys have probably seen this slide already. We are a data-driven company. If you guys can please submit your feedback before you forget about it. It really helps us figure out what content is relevant for you guys so we can bring the best stuff to Tableau Conference every year. Also, I wanted to just touch on a few related sessions. Unfortunately, they've already passed, but again, the recordings are going to be available for you. The first is our product manager for the Advanced Analytics feature team has a session on data science applications within Tableau and R, or TabPy and R. And the second one is one I'm really excited about, is Advanced Analytics at Scale. It's run by two of our colleagues that work in our London office, and they show how to scale data science within an organization through external services. So we've shown you guys one method through embedding, and there's another method through external services that I think is worth exploring if you are really interested in pursuing this. So with that, we'll open it up to questions. If you guys just want to raise your hand, and then I can reiterate questions.
Can I get that slide one more time?
Yeah. Easy one.
What if, I mean, can I cut off the Tableau part because I think it's possible to do that right now? Like I can deploy the same model in classic and just directly and cut out Tableau like you. What makes that different?
Yeah, so the question was, can we, in the same framework, can we cut off the, did you say the Tableau piece or the web application?
Tableau piece, because I think I can do that right now by I can run the model and eliminate Tableau and maybe use, like Plotly and we still get the same rate. But what's the advantage of that?
Yeah, so, well, the advantage is, so can we, from the same framework, can we cut off the Tableau Server piece? You could, but the advantage of this is that in this case, a lot of people were already using Tableau dashboards, and it's really easy to build Tableau dashboards out of a database, right? So instead of coding your dashboard, you just connect to a database and build something in minutes, as opposed to programming programming from scratch.
Yeah.
So it kind of helps you keep that dashboard creation piece really easy, while still having the opportunity to run complex data science models on the back.
The other thing that I'll just add is that that's exporting information to a database, right, that is then permissioned by Tableau. That is a data source that now lives on Tableau Server. So you can also let people go in and explore things with that data source and not just give them one static visualization using Plotly.
Cool.
So in your demo, when you load up the application, are you embedding all your Tableau visualizations into sort of iframe, and then are you taking it through that URL, or how are you achieving that?
Yeah, so the question was, in the demo, are we embedding those visualizations in the web app in an iframe, or how are we doing that? Remember, we used the JavaScript API to actually create a URL and then put that into a div into our web app. The JavaScript API actually creates an iframe. So that's how we embed Tableau in any web application in any product. It's through an iframe. Yeah. Yeah.
So just one thing I'm wondering, in your experience, how easy or difficult it is to keep all of this in sync when things are changing? Because it seems like it's a lot.
Yeah, so the question is, so there were quite a few pieces in what we covered today, right, in that framework. So things change over time. So how difficult is it to keep everything in sync? What would change the most is just, hey, there's a new model. Hey, there are more variables that I want to do. So a lot of that would be dependent on how you develop the web application. If you develop the web application so that it's flexible, so that it can read out of a list of models that has a list of variables, then that should be flexible enough to keep up to date. But if you have a web application like this one today that's only a couple of models, that's kind of difficult, right? Like every time I need to add a new model, I need to deploy. So if I have a lot of models I know it's going to be changing, I would change the web app that we showed today so that it actually is flexible in receiving perhaps maybe the name of the model and then something else. Yeah, does that help? Okay, cool.
Just one more other note on that. There are partners also that were at this conference that help you deploy models in a more scalable way as well, and let you manage the different iterations of those models. AWS comes to mind. I talked to Data Robot, they do stuff like that. So there's other products that can help you scale that. And then also the JavaScript API and the REST API can be used to scale so that any workbook that gets added to that project will automatically be available to end users. That's another thing that I think about for scaling.
Cool. Oh yeah, over there.
Our company currently uses SSRS reports, and they embed it in SharePoint through web parts.
Mm-hmm.
And they use SQL at the back end of SSRS reports. I'd like to replace that with Tableau to put it on there. I think that we're a subcontractor for the VA, and it's the VA's website.
Okay.
So pretty much tie our hands about how much they'll let us mess with stuff and what software they'll let us use. I don't know if they'll let us do Java or anything like that on it. Without too much programming, do you know if you can embed those Tableau things on the SharePoint website using web parts or anything like that?
Yeah, good question. So the question is, so what if I cannot use the JavaScript API to embed because it's logged in my SharePoint site or my SharePoint server in this case? So there are other ways to embed Tableau as well. In fact, if you go into any visualizations, you'll see a share button over there, and when you click the share button, there's a link, but there's also a custom code. So that's just HTML code. So you can copy that and paste that into anything. It could be, I've seen that used for SharePoint, for example. The only advantage of the JavaScript API is that it gives you, if you can do it, it allows you to also interact, for example, between SharePoint and the viz. So if I click something on SharePoint, I can make that change my visualization. So it gives you more flexibility. But if you cannot use it, that's fine. You can still do more like just the URL piece. Okay?
There are some vendors with some products that are actually fairly cheap here, like Ultimate and the product that allows you to go through SharePoint and Tableau.
Mm-hmm.
So you might want to look at that. It's much cheaper to use Tableau.
I could barely hear. You said proprietary products.
I said there are some vendors that have enabled that. when we're speaking at this conference, architect one in which we embed SharePoint content and cross that with Tableau, so it might help you with, there's fairly important.
Okay.
Okay.
The VA has a list of software products that they have contracts with, so I haven't seen this on the list. It's on the list, we're allowed to have it, so.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that.
Yeah. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
I have a different kind of question. It's about the technology. The way how you handle basically is running a process that is a command prompt.
Mm-hmm.
How you handle that when massive people is going to this web page, not give you the server down because it's too many ones running at the same time and then get down the server.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's difficult to control process that is threats, if that is about it.
Yeah, yeah, good question. So the question was, in the method that we use today, we're using a command prompt. We're opening a command prompt in the background. But what if we have, a lot of people going in at the same time running that model, and we have a lot of command prompts opening in the back? Can that bring the server down? It depends. It could. So what you could do, just to manage it for scale with this method, you can just open multiple threads in the web application. So you run in each one on different threads. So that doesn't bring down the web application. You will still need to have a strong server to support all of those models running, but that won't bring down the web application. So you will want to, instead of use a single thread, you will want to use multi-threads for that piece. If you want more, there are, for example, with TabPy, we use APIs to communicate with TabPy, so you may be able to tap into those as opposed to using a command line. But we thought the model of the command line is fairly generic across different languages, so that's another advantage of this one. Sure. Yeah, question or?
Have you guys looked into having, in addition to the specific result or one user to the other user people? The reason I believe that is because we want to have week after week. So we would potentially like the user to be logging and seeing people log how it's changed over time with Tableau, and then switch to, say, the personal user and create their own thing. You guys have experience with that?
So that could look like either a separate workbook that's showing that lives on the web portal. It could also just be another dashboard within the same workbook. So two data sources are fueling two different dashboards within the same workbook. That's one method that I think that could work.
And the question was,
Oh, sorry.
over there is, so we are asking Jamie to type all these variables, right, at the beginning. Could we use some predefined variables so that we don't have to ask for everything, or at least we give the users a starting point? I think you can definitely do that. In fact, for the model that Blair built, if I remember correctly, we're picking 6 variables or 7, but there are a lot more variables that you can send to it. So the other ones are kind of in the model itself. They're already set by default. So yeah.
And then with that, is it possible to then also schedule it? So everyone say once a week or once a day, they have an updated version of the thing?
Yeah, exactly. And the question from there is, and so can I schedule it so that it's refreshed every week? So when I go, I don't see a result from a month ago, but I see the result based on the prediction from last week. You can definitely do that. I have a customer that has a list of scripts that is a batch file, essentially, that just runs every week and is scheduled to run in Windows. And so they run them every weekend just to make sure that those models that they need to run are done automatically, so people don't have to actually run them manually. They're pre-run by default. And for them, it was a PowerShell script, but a batch file in PowerShell, but it could be anything that allows you to script something like that.
We run ours every hour. So every hour it gets updated for 100 different models.
Excellent, yeah. Perfect.
I have a question. And
Please.
I'm not a web designer, so I'm just going to start that way. But we have embedded everything into our website. But the problem we're having, and it's probably a super easy question, I just haven't figured out because I'm not a web designer. It's not intuitive currently the way it's done. On my desktop it looks great, but when I switch it to my laptop or somebody else has a different size screen, I can't make the embed look good.
Mm-hmm.
How do you fix
So that's a good question. So the question was, I built something and it works. It looks great in desktop, but then when I embed it, and then because I have a different screen, a different size, it doesn't look as great. So how do I handle that? That could be more on the part of designing the dashboard, so not necessarily on the embedding, but more on how you design the dashboard. And there are multiple ways to do that, just selecting the size of it. Like maybe not automatic, maybe you'll want to use a scale, so that a range of values. But that would be more on the design of the workbook itself, not in the embedded, yeah.
Well, so just on that, I mean, the embed code also allows you to scale the size of the div that's being returned back.
That's correct. So, but it still relies on how you've designed
Design it
it on the dashboard.
Well, it works on, like, if I just go to Tableau Server, it works, but when I embed it, that's when and I open it up, it doesn't work on my website. That's the problem. It's not
Mm.
entering to it every time.
Okay.
Okay.
I think I have an answer. You should be able to get with the developer, have them read the screen size of the headers,
Hmm.
and
Good
then
point.
set the size of the iframe based on the screen size of the developer.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, see, I told you for the
Yeah.
expert web developers, look around.
Fantastic.
So cool. Yeah.
I have another question only to clarify this I didn't miss it. The part of the REST API that you use is to get the image?
Yes. So
Can I use the same over a Tableau dashboard? Because I have something, like I have a main menu, and one of the things that I have icons, but every time I need to create this icon, maybe it's a better idea to call the picture that the server gives me to put it inside of the dashboard. Can I do that?
So the question was, can I use the REST API to get images of multiple dashboards? Is that?
But inside of a Tableau dashboard, inside of a web page.
Inside of a Tableau dashboard or a web page. You can definitely use the REST API within a web application, so you can have thumbnails. In fact, those thumbnails are the same thumbnails that you see in Tableau Server. But you cannot use the REST API in a workbook, in a Tableau workbook. Okay.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Yeah.
Santiago and I will stay up here for additional questions that folks might have.
Just curious, in the trusted authentication, you use a login and I use name password. So that's where we have everybody to view the dashboard using one Tableau.
So the question was, in trusted authentication, you're picking a user, so you could have a generic user to access everything. The answer is, you probably don't want to do that just because of the agreement. But the second is, the problem with that in this part, and the reason just out of the contract is that you cannot track who's using it. So everything is the same person. You would not be able to do this because you don't know if it's Jamie or if it's Cameron. They all see the same blurred data all together. So you don't want to use that I don't know, system account to do that, just because you lose track of, you lose the possibility to enable row-level security. Yeah, okay, cool. Well, thank you all so much for staying longer. Safe travels back home. I hope this has been a great week for all of you, and really appreciate you all's time and being here. Thank you.